Shut up, compressor. Hey everyone, Matt here from Doogs Models. Let's fill some gaps. So, far and away, my least favorite part of this hobby would have to be cleaning shit up. Shut up, compressor. Flash, seams, gaps, that sort of stuff. It's a necessary part of the hobby, but it's not the thing that I enjoy doing. But it has to happen. Now, you may hear seams and gaps and think, what's the difference? Well, the difference is when you have a seam, it's something like, on the nose here of the MiG-23, just the act of gluing it, you have to deal with slight imperfections where the joins come together. Maybe if you're using a touch and flow or something like that, the metal of the syringe needle actually creates a little gouge in there that needs to be slightly filled in and cleaned up. That is a seam. A gap is something where you literally have a hole, a canyon type thing in the plastic between two parts where they don't quite come together. That is what I had where the rear and the mid fuselages come together in this section. And it's also what I have on this taped up tail. It's very hard to see in there, and I know the wing is hitting the camera and all that shit. But Trumpeter did a pretty solid job with, I would say, the front 2/3 of this aircraft. Most of the stuff fits pretty well. You can see here this nastiness with the intake. It's just because it's not all locked down. Once you actually lock it down, everything seems to go together decently. But the back side of this thing has had some troubles. Same thing happens with this tail. I found as I was working on it that there is, again, it's very hard to see in here with the tape already in place. But right in the middle section here, there's a part that when you look at it, when it's just normal, when it's just sitting there glued in or even just placed in, the center area here has a higher gap than the rest of the tail. There's not really much of a gap in the back, and there's really not much of one up front. There's a little one that runs along in here, and there's that deeper one right in the center, right essentially in the same place where the mounting slot goes. But you still have this nice gap all in here, brought on, I don't even know why. I could have, yes, shaved down the rear and the front and maybe gotten somewhere in there, but at the same time, you run the risk of then other things not fitting and having more gaps all over the place. So I figured it'd be easier just to go with the relatively good fit in the front and back and just deal with filling in that middle area. So that's what we're gonna do. Now, it comes to materials. Most putties shrink. Even the good ones shrink. They may be great for something like the nose where you just need a little tiny bit and it won't shrink, but as you get more and more volume, that shrinkage will occur. Not something I want to deal with, so there will not be any of my usual putties, which I don't even know where they're at right now. My 3M Acryl or my, oh, here's one. My Mr. Paint filler. This stuff is actually really nice. It doesn't shrink all that much. Very easy to apply, sands down nicely, all that good stuff. But it's better for, like you can see some in here on the top of the fuselage where there are some little spots that just need a little touch up. Or, there's still some here on the bottom of the nose that has not been cleaned up yet. That's great for that. It's not as great when you have these big gaping holes that you need to fill. So, since I'm all out of chicken nuggets, which are the best filler there is, I'm going to be using Milliput. I'm not going to lie, I really don't care for using this stuff. The usability is a pain in the ass, as you will see as we get into it, but it doesn't shrink, and it's very easy to clean up so that you don't have to deal with cleanup later on. Getting to that point is what's a pain in the ass, but, is what it is. This is also something that I have not used all that frequently because typically most of the kits that I'm working on don't end up having these massive gaps. And usually in the places where I have had those gaps in the past, they've been in areas where it's kind of easy just to be really rough with it and get in there and, fill it with super glue or Fill it with styrene shims and cut them down and sand it and make it all fit. With the tail, I mean, obviously, you know, you've got the tail detail, you've got the fuselage detail, you've got that sort of 90-degree angle. It's tough to get in there and get a really nice smooth line going on. Because of that, I don't want to deal with something like filling it with super glue, or, you know, obviously a styrene shim is going to cause problems when you're dealing with those 90-degree angles. It's one thing when you can just get in there with sprue cutters or something like that and cut straight across a flat plane and go to town. Can't do that with the tail. So, Milliput it is. So I'm going to walk through the fun that is this process, and you can see firsthand how somebody who doesn't particularly care for doing this and who will readily admit it is not their greatest strength in modeling goes about it. So what do we need? Well, obviously you need the stupid putty. I just use scissors to cut the shit before I mix it. We need somewhere to put it because it gets sticky as all hell once you mix the putty up. So for that I have a cheap glass frame that says shit like, "It's great to be friends" and stuff on it. This is intended to be eventually the base for some sort of vignette piece that fits into a frame. I mainly got it for the relatively low profile frame. Don't care about the writing, but the glass is a good surface to set the Milliput on, so I can cut up some strips and things like that. See, I also have, very necessary, a container full of water. Milliput responds very well to water, and it's pretty much essential to its use unless you just want it stuck to your hand the whole time. Speaking of hand, we'll be using gloves. And then the other fun magical bit of this are silicone shaping brushes. Now, the thing about these is the Milliput doesn't really, I mean, it does stick to them, but it doesn't stick to them terribly. And for this one, I will probably be using these two 90-degree, you know, flat bastards more than the others. And the thing is, you get it on there, you can use this to not only sort of smooth it down in a dragging motion, you can also use it to chisel up the excess in a pushing motion. So you can get in there, you know, and do like this and sort of dig up what you don't need, which with Milliput is, in my experience at least, quite a bit, which is why we have the tape dam all over the MiG-23. So let's turn the camera around and do this. So first things first, we got to get the putty out of the box. Now, Milliput is a two-part epoxy putty, so you've got two parts. Seems to make a lot more than you would think it necessarily needs too, which is nice. So go with this much. Okay, now we're going to mix the putty. So to do that, first we're going to get fingers a little bit wet. Pick these bastards up. This is the really fun part, just working this shit together. I find it's best to kind of take it and make sausages and then sort of ball it up and knead it up once you get it kind of going, and then just keep making sausages, keep balling and kneading, and you can see it starts to stick to the gloves as it mixes up. Again, an absolute fucking joy to work with. All right, a little bit more water. Two or three more times and we should be to a place where we can be happy with this. And they say to mix it for 5 minutes and then mix it for another minute. Shut up, compressor. But I've never really found that to be the best guide, because once it gets mixed, it's very obvious because it starts sticking to everything. No longer looks yellow, it just straight up white. And that's it. We're gonna pop this down here. Ah, shit. Yeah, I was hoping I had some wax paper or something, but I do not have wax paper. I have to deal with what we got. The thing I'm trying to do here is I want nice long pieces that I can, nice long thin pieces that I can just shove into that tail gap. Now it's occurring to me that I have an acrylic rolling pin that would be really great for this, but I do not have it with me at the moment, and just have to deal, I guess. But that's looking pretty good. This is why we keep the water nearby. Right. Get my hands a little bit cleaned up. Now to cut the strips, I'm going to use this little blade that I have from a PE folder. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of PE folders. I don't think they work all that great. So use this to just get in here. Give me some strips. All right, let's get that guy up. That's the problem, is this shit is so sticky. I'm gonna just place this over here real fast. Sorry, I can't move the camera while I'm doing this, so I'll edit this in post. Another little scrap, and that should be all that we need. See, it makes too much. Okay. So we're back, and I've got the Milliput sort of laid in here where it needs to go. I typically tend to like to try to move kind of quickly on this stuff because I know that if you leave it, it'll get a bit firmer and a bit less sticky, but this is where it's going to be interesting here. So getting it into that gap with the fun joy of 90 degrees. See, though, the water does a remarkable job essentially clearing the path for us. I don't really want all of this up here, so I'm going to go ahead and remove just a little bit. Come on. Let's get back to the spreading action here. You don't have to worry if you get a little bit on the rest of the plastic, because as long as it's mostly liquid like that, it wipes off pretty easily. just like that. And I think it's really catching the highlights on the monitor at least. Alright, so now we're going to come in with the you can see there's just a lot of pushing shit in together into place. I'm going to pick this up for a second. I'll be right back. As you can see here, it's just more wetting and smoothing and wetting and smoothing. As much fun as that is. Again, it's the beauty of having water on hand. Get in here and just wipe the offending shit away. So I think it's time now that we switch over to getting really serious with the color scrapers here. The goal of this is to have as little of this left over when we remove that tape, so the final smoothing is very clean. One thing you can kind of do, I'm not the biggest fan of this, but it helps at this point, is getting in here with a Q-tip. Q-tips tend to fall to shit quickly in the face of this stuff though, so you gotta be careful. See right up here, it's looking a little bit it's already looking pretty nice and smooth in there though. Alright, let's go to the other side. The only thing I wish about these silicone shapers, I mean, they're nice, but I wish they were a little bit stiffer. Because this stuff takes pressure to get the bigger gobs out. We had a little spot here where it looks like too much came away. Or hell, maybe the gap was too deep. So this side is looking mostly good, I think. Check out this side one more time. Okay, so I've gone in here and I've done all kinds of smoothing with fingers. Got this nice and smooth down, so now it's time to do our moment of truth. Okay, so we're about halfway there. I'm gonna say the Q-tip is actually working better than anticipated it would in this area, because finger has a tough time getting in there. Q-tip seems to be a-okay. That's not looking too shabby. Now the reason, you might be able to see it in here, the reason that we come back and do this after the tape has been removed is that the tape, just by the nature of what it is, leaves ridges in the putty. This final smoothing, once we've removed most of the material, means a lot less smearing of shit around. I mean, there's still some. I have yet to find a way to avoid that. If anybody has any thoughts, I would love to hear them. So you can see kind of right in here, it's still got a little bit of nastiness that we need to straighten out. So back to the Q-tip. Most of these little things here, where it's gotten in the rivets, it's not filling them, it's just excess water that kind of goes in there like a wash almost. It just happens to be slightly colored. So as you can see, there's a line in here. The Q-tip is not pulling it away. And part of that is just because it's just, there's a bigger gap in there that needs to fill, and the Q-tip just can't drag it out. Part of that is because I'm convinced that in the mission to straighten the tail while gluing it, I already knew that I was going to have to be filling these gaps, so I didn't really pay any attention to one side being higher up than the other. With the result that I think this one has literally just more gaps. Alright, let's do some cleanup. So there we have it. There we have a little splash mark on the... Shut up, compressor. So I'm going to do a quick spot check, make sure I have all those little bits of shit off of this, and then we'll turn it around for a wrap-up. Okay, so that is the sloppy, nasty process of filling gaps with Milliput. Now we've got both sides of the tail. You can see the white line in there at the base. And here's the starboard side, or port side. Yeah, same deal. So you can see why it's the kind of thing that you maybe want to save until you need it. It's a lot messier than your typical, slap down some Mr. Surfacer or some Mr. Paint filler or 3M Acryl or, you know, Bondo, whatever you want, whatever you happen to be using for general seam filling, a lot easier and straightforward than dealing with, you know, building your tape dams, getting in there, stuffing the stuff in, using water, using the color shapers, and using Q-tips and using your finger. Granted, the finger wasn't super useful because of the angles we were working at here. But it's just, it's a tedious, messy process, and you have to be vigilant to not get that shit all over the rest of the detail around there. So, you know, it is what it is. It is an extremely effective, frustrating gap filler, but it's also not the kind of thing that you want to be busting out just for general seams and things like that. Like, you know, if you think about the seam up here between the front and the mid fuselage, you can see it right behind that Mr. Paint filler dot. Let's see if I can get the airbrush needle to show it a little better. Right in there, along where the intakes join the fuselage, and the, you know, that is an actual seam line, and we want to maintain that to some extent. That'll probably be more of a 3M Acryl or Mr. Surfacer 500. I want something that will shrink up a little bit and still preserve a hint of that line, but tamp it down, obviously. But that has to wait until the intakes get glued in, which they're not yet. But for the ass end of this thing, which has had its share of fit joys and, you know, certain gaps that have to be dealt with, Milliput does the job. So hopefully this was useful for, especially for other modelers who, like me, kind of quake and shudder and procrastinate at the idea of having to fill and deal with all this crap. If you're faced with a kit that has gaps in places and it needs to be addressed, Milliput. So hope that was useful. See you in the next video. Later.